The program was listed as great prints from your lab, and we are going to cover that, but I wanted to make sure that you can get great prints wherever you are having them made. How many of you guys do your own printing? Okay, probably more than half of you, so that's important. And then how many of you guys use a lab? Everybody, pretty much? Okay. I do it both ways. Depends on what I want to print on. I do like doing a lot of my own printing, but there are times when it makes sense to send it out to a lab. So wouldn't it be nice if just what you saw on your screen is what came out in your print? Is that too much to ask? No. So yeah, well, I'm going to show you a way that will take away the fear and will make it actually easy. You just have to follow these steps. And also for you note takers, to make it really easy on you, I just completed a new series of videos for X-Rite that are actually uploading as we speak, that will be on both one of my websites and on X-Rite's website. That's going to go over this stuff step by step in even more detail than I'm going to talk to you today. So you can keep your notes to a minimum. We'll give you the address of the website, and then you can just watch it at your leisure, and it's broken into sections. So what I want to do is I'm going to talk about the process and what's going on first, and then I'm going to show you real world in both Lightroom and in Photoshop how to make this happen. Fair enough? Anybody not using Lightroom or Photoshop? And by the way, any of you shoot JPEGs? Any JPEG shooters? Oh, good, I don't have to throw anybody out. All right. So today is sponsored by both X-Rite and Ilford. And Brenda, I'm sorry I didn't have a slide for you. We just talked about this the other day. So glad to have Brenda and Ilford here. I have been a big fan of the Ilford papers for a long time. And we kind of lost touch in a bit when I went a slightly different direction, and Ilford was sold to a new company, and we reconnected fairly recently. And I am absolutely a huge fan of their papers. They are just so beautiful. And now that they're under a new management that really has their act together, I am really happy to be able to work with them again. This is one of my favorite papers, and I'll show you how I got here. And by the way, something very cool in this space that's new to me, these are really nice daylight lights that we're seeing. So when you actually look at a print under it, they're actually daylight. So this is a print that I just printed the other day, and this is actually on the video, if you go watch the video after the fact. And to get colors like this, right the first time every time is what we're after. Because as much as I love Ilford, and you guys would love Ilford too, and my Epson printer, we all know that the ink and the paper costs a little bit. They'll give you as many printers as you want as long as you keep buying the ink and paper. So do you want to print this 5 times to get it right? No, you'd like to get it right the first time. And the same thing you send out to a lab to have a big print, you want it to be right. So that's what we're going to do. A little more about me for those of you guys that don't know me. I am one of X-Rite's Colorati, which I don't know where that name came from, but anyway. I'm also one of Sony's artisans. So for you Canon shooters, you know the Explorers of Light and Nikon. What is Nikon now? Ambassadors? Yes. Nikon ambassadors, and Panasonic has luminaries, and Fuji has something. Fuji, I don't know what Fuji calls their people, but I'm one of Sony's sponsored shooters. Okay, so as I mentioned, wouldn't this be nice? Is it asking too much? No, there's just some things you need to know to take control of the process from beginning to end. And what's really important about doing this is, as your image makes its journey from capture to raw conversion to edit to print, each time it's losing something. And what we want to make sure happens is we lose as little as possible. Now, there are some struggles involved because each of these devices has different abilities to capture and produce color. Our monitors, now I'm only working on my laptop today, this is an sRGB display. Well, my camera raw files are in basically ProPhoto RGB, actually slightly beyond that, it's a visible light spectrum. And sadly, there's no way for us to see that. There are no monitors that will display all those colors. And there's no papers that are going to print all those colors. Yet I have a monitor that will show me less color than my printer can print. And my camera's capturing more colors than I can even see. So what we want to do is minimize these problems so that what we get reflects what we're doing. Now, how many of you just have an sRGB display? And most people, if you don't know, you have an sRGB display. Because if you bought a wide gamut or Adobe RGB display, then they will make sure to let you know on the box, because it's a big deal. Apple, strangely enough, on their new machines, on their new iMacs, has a new color space they're using. because they're Apple. They can't do it the same as everyone else. It's an Adobe RGB space that is slightly shifted. It's called P3. Don't ask me why. It's more of a video version of Adobe RGB. It's shifted slightly because everybody thinks the world is going video, and they're actually probably right. But I don't see any 18-year-olds out there, so we're still going to be dealing with prints. And for me, one of my personal goals is every image I take. And when we're done today, I'll leave you with a little bit of inspiration of some of my recent travels to show you my passions. But for me, the goal of every image I take is it's going to be a print somewhere. It's going to be hanging on a wall. Now, it's not realistic. My catalog at home has 80,000 images in it. I don't have that much wall space. But the goal when I take that shot is this something that has a chance of ending up on my wall? If the answer is no, never, then I don't even bother taking the image. I'll just put my camera away and sit back and enjoy it. So that all goes to the printing process and the editing process, as we'll see. So here's where we're going to go through it. I'm going to go through some of the gear involved. And there's 3 pieces of X-Rite gear that I'm going to show you. I am quite gushy about one of them, the Color Checker Passport right here. How many of you have one of these? Okay. If you don't have one of these, you have to have one. This is the best, and I just got the price from B&H. Let's see. This is the best $83.25 you'll ever spend. I do not shoot without this thing, and you'll see why in a little bit. We're going to talk about monitor calibration. How many of you are calibrating and profiling your monitors? Okay, about 40% of you. All right, well, we'll see about why that's so important. And then we're going to prepare files both for lab and for going out to your own printer. How many of you have a bigger format printer, a 13 or 17-inch carriage printer like this? Okay, so you know the papers, as wonderful as they are, they are pricey when you get into the fine art papers. And you want to get the most out of them. You want to get the best prints possible. So for that, I'm going to show you how you create and use a custom printer paper profile so that you can get the most out of the paper and the printer that you've got. So first of all, right when you start at capture, you've got 2 things to deal with. You've got your monitor and you've got the color at capture. And we're going to see this more when we go into software, but this is where the color checker comes in. So let me just give you a quick once-over on this. So why is this thing necessary? Can't you just white balance? Well, white balance tells you where neutral is. It says, okay, this is even numbers. This is gray or white. However, every camera and every model of every camera has a different idea of where to go to the colors from that neutral point. So what does red mean? How many of you guys used to shoot film? I'm going to gather most of you. Yeah, didn't you buy film because you liked its color response? Certain films had very strong certain colors. Well, guess what? Digital cameras, although they probably shouldn't, also have some color biases. And every manufacturer and every set of engineers behind it has a different idea of what red should be. There is no, you would think there's a standard, there isn't one. So how do we get a standard? That's what this thing provides. And it's as complicated to use as holding it up and taking a picture of it. Now, if you have a 600mm lens on your camera, then you have to find a friend. But other than that, it's as simple as taking a picture of it. If you actually look on the target, in fact, let's take a closer look at the big target itself and see what this means. This one's actually upside down, but anyway. If you take a look, we have from white to black. And look, red, green, blue, CMYK. They're right there, right on the first rows. And then above that are 2 rows of colors that exist in nature. There's plant colors, skin colors, things you're going to encounter. These are all known values. And by the way, this is not a printed thing. This is not just a printing press that makes this. These are actual paint, like paint patches. That's why this thing is a little bit pricey. Because these are formulated and put down each individual patch. These are known values. So the software knows, well, when it sees this red, it knows what the values of the red should be. And without me going into the deep end of the pool, are there any engineers here? There's always a couple in the group. No? No engineers here? Okay, good. The software works behind the scenes in something called Lab Color, which is a device-independent space. So it knows the math that when it sees this color, what do I need to do to make sure that this color happens? And all of these things that we're dealing with are dealing with what are called profiles. Now, profiles sound scary and weird, but they're actually very simple. All they are is a set of corrections to take color from one place to another. That's all it is. So if I have a camera and I take a picture of this thing under a certain lighting condition. So we have relative daylight here. Well, I have my white balance set. You still have to do your white balance. But then how do I get to red from that white balance? And that's what a profile does. So if you take a picture of this thing, and the software looks at the red and says, well, it's a little green, the profile says, okay, next time we want to actually have this red, remember we got to take out that little bit of green to get to the red. And in a very simplified way, that's what a profile is doing. And when you see it in action, you'll really understand it. Also on here, on the other side is a white balance card. It is slightly off-white. How many of you have old Kodak gray cards? Do not use them for white balancing. They're not neutral. There's actually a slight blue cast to them. So you're better off doing this. And this is an interesting target in that it is a spectrally neutral white balance, which means red, green, and blue reflect equally under any light source. So it's not just a plain white piece of paper. That's kind of an important thing. Anybody do video? For video, here's a great white target that you can sample off of your software. And this little target up top is more like a flavoring target. I'm not going to go into this today. It's more for kind of custom white balancing if you want to warm or cool your images. We'll see this again when we get into software, because I want to show you how, not only how important it is, but how much time it's going to save you. It will cut down the hours you spent in front of your computer doing color editing just by having that. So monitor calibration. For those of you not calibrating your monitors, where's my little monitor calibrator? Where'd it go? Oh, here it is right here. I've got two here, but let me show you this one first. So monitor calibration is the single most important thing you can do for anybody. I'm assuming you guys are editing your own images. You're making your own adjustments. Well, how about if your monitor's not right? If you've never calibrated your monitor, the way it came out of the box, it's always going to be, one, much brighter than it needs to be. Two, they have a tendency towards blue. Three, they're a little saturated. Why? It makes the internet, games, movies look sexy and bright and saturated. However, it's not good for photography, because you're now judging your images based on what you see on the screen. And if the screen is adding those attributes to your file, when you go to print, it's not going to be there because it's the screen that's doing it. It's not actually in the print. So for those of you guys not calibrating your monitor, I want you to look up this way. Okay, look this way, all right? You're going to calibrate your monitor. Got it? Okay. Let's take a look at the reasons. Again, this is a really important part. If there's one thing you end up doing because of this talk, you got to get your monitor calibrated. As I mentioned, monitors look a little too blue is fairly common. Why? All right, there's some of us that are of the same age here. How many of you remember the old Clorox commercials? Do you remember what they put in? They always had the advertising. Bluing. Why? Blue makes white look whiter. It makes it look cleaner. A yellow white does not look clean. That's why monitors look that way. It makes the white look nice and clean. And it makes your browser look great. It makes games and movies look great. But if your monitor's too blue and you bring up an image on the monitor like we see here, what are you going to do to it? You're going to adjust it. Well, that image looks too blue. What's the opposite of blue?
Yellow.
Yellow. So you add some yellow to the image. You adjust the color. Oh, it looks great on the monitor now. Then I send it out to print, and what happens? I get a yellow print because the file was fine. It was the monitor that was making it blue, not the file itself. The other thing that is very common, it's too bright. One of the least worthwhile pieces of data or information on this planet are the specifications on monitor boxes. The numbers they put on them are worthless because they all put how bright the monitor can be. Well, that's all lovely. You'll see, oh, it's candelas or lumens, whatever. Usually candelas per meter squared is the technical term. They might say lumens, whatever. So you'll see these numbers. Oh, this monitor goes up to 500. This monitor only goes up to 375. The 500 monitor must be better. Wrong. Your monitor to you, as far as photo editing goes, is worthless to you if it's above 120, as far as brightness goes. Because at that point, you're just blowing out the whites, you're opening up the shadows. It's not real. So if your monitor's too bright, same thing. All right, that image looks a little too bright. I need to get my depth back down. I do some kind of adjustment in Photoshop or Lightroom to make it darker, and what happens? You get dark prints because it was your monitor that was influencing your decision. So we don't want that. We don't want dark prints. We don't want yellow prints. We just want them to look like they do on our monitor. So to do that, you've got to calibrate your monitor. Let's see. All right, there's a couple of choices. I'll start up the software so that you can see it. Watching a monitor calibrate isn't a particularly exciting thing to see, but I'll start it up so you can see what it does. A couple of different devices here. The ColorMonkey display, bang for the buck as far as power goes. I love this. This is my favorite one. They're $149. And this is something you should do to your monitor fairly frequently, and it does depend somewhat on the level of your monitor. If you have a real high-end graphics display, which means you spent $750 or more for it, then you can get away with a couple of months or so, redo it. If you've got a mid-range monitor, really, every month you should do it. It takes 5 minutes. Just turn the thing on, start it up, let it do its thing, get a cup of coffee. I asked if there are any engineers here because there's also the i1 Display Pro right there. Looks kind of similar, doesn't it? The big difference in it is it uses a different software. The software is very advanced. It's the same software that X-Rite's $1,500 i1 Pro system uses. It creates lots of data. It will allow you to measure your monitor in different pieces to see if there's any variations from edge to edge. And most people, don't listen, Sandra, most people don't care. They just want their monitor to be right. So that's why I ask, if you're really into data, it's a left brain. If you're a left brain person, get the i1 Display Pro. If you just want your monitor to be fine, leave me alone, just do your job, then you want the ColorMonkey display. And then the third piece is the ColorMonkey Photo. We'll talk about this when we get into printer profiling. This is a bigger unit. This is actually a spectrophotometer that allows us to create custom paper profiles for our papers in addition to the monitor profiling. So let me back out here a second. I'm just going to start up the software just so you can see what it does. Let's go into the ColorMonkey display software. Of course there's a new version. And we're going to say we don't care. Let's see. Later. Remind me later. I'm sure you will. By the way, if I ever meet the person who made the bouncing icon on the bottom of Mac, I'm going to slap them. That is so annoying. Okay, so you're presented with two choices. Profile my display, profile my projector. So if you have a projector, any of you guys in camera clubs? If you're in a camera club, you should have one of these because this can profile your projector as well. You just by spinning around and you point it at the screen and it does the same thing. So to profile your display, and again, I'm not going to go through the whole process, it sees my display and it sees these things because these are just considered another monitor. For this exercise, it doesn't matter. By the way, display match. Not a fan, by the way. And I'm looking over at Sandra to make sure she's not going to yell at me because she's representing X-Rite here. What display match does is it will allow you to attempt to make all your monitors look the same. However, to do that, it has to calibrate to the lowest common denominator. So if you have a really good monitor and some kind of nasty thing that you've had for years, it will try to dumb down your really good monitor so it looks like the nasty thing. So the answer is, don't check that box. I don't recommend it. I've never found a reason for a photographer doing any editing to actually dumb down their best display. Use your best display for your editing. So I click on Next, and it says, what do you want to do, easy or advanced? Well, we've already decided we want it easy. So you just click on Next, and, well, you don't know how bright the room is. So it will tell you. So it just asks you to put it next to your computer, or next to your display, and click on Measure. And what it's doing is it's just measuring the light that's hitting the area around your screen. And from that, it will decide, okay, based on the ambient light, this is how bright your monitor needs to be. So it's doing its thing. By the way, if you're in a situation where the sun is actually hitting your monitor, bad. Don't do that. Ideally, what you should have is a hood around your monitor, or at least a dim room with no direct light hitting the screen. You want the monitor to be the brightest thing that you're looking at. Why are you taking your time? Did I? Hello? We're here. Okay. I don't know why it's not doing that. Let's try it one more time. Let's click Measure. Okay, let's see if it does it this time. Maybe I really should have done that software update. Yeah, I might have to skip that part. All right, there's a way around it. I'm going to go to Advanced. Actually, you know what? I should have done Advanced, because this is an important thing you need to know here, and this applies to any of you going to a lab. the white point that your monitor should be at. You notice it says D65 recommended, which is the same as 6500K in color temperature. There are a couple of labs out there, big name labs, that tell you profile your monitor to 5000K or D50. They are wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. We have all been out to see them to try to fix the error of their ways, and they refuse to listen. There's just 2 labs I know that are doing that still. They're wrong, and there's lots of technical reasons for it. If you're a techie, I can point you to a 50-page white paper that will explain why. Other than that, take my word for it. And then also the brightness. Remember I mentioned that number, the brightness number, and you see some monitors go up to 400 and 500. The brightest you ever really want to run your monitors is around 120. Because at that point, you're getting a good depiction of the highlights and the shadows. Anything above that, the shadows are going to unnaturally open up. And you're going to see this shadow detail that isn't really going to show up in your print because, again, it's the monitor that's going too bright. So 120 is where you like to be. The best is if you can run it at 80. Now, 80 is pretty dim. So if you're in a dim room, that's where you want to be. In fact, if you walk into any ad agency here in the city and you look at their editing rooms, they're about candle-lit brightness in those rooms, and all of their monitors are set to 80. So lower is better because the lower it is, the smoother the transition you have from midtones to highlights and midtones to shadows. So by just telling it, or I'm just going to tell it go to 80, it will bypass that thing where it's going to try to measure it for me. Yes, when I get home, I will update the software on my laptop. So, oh, it's asking for it again. Oh. All right, let's see if it'll do it. If not, I'll just bypass it. So after it's done doing this part, what it's going to simply do, as all of the monitor calibration systems do, is it's just going to start sending colors up to the screen. And it'll go through red, green, blue, and a bunch of grays and a bunch of other colors. So this thing, as it's sitting on the display, it just hangs on the screen, is going to read the colors as they show up. And when it sees red, all right, it says 100% red's coming, because it knows that the software's telling it, here's 100% red. It measures what shows up. Invariably, it's going to be something slightly different. And from that, it will create its set of corrections so that the next time the software asks for 100% red, that's what shows up. And really, in its simplicity, that's what all a monitor profile is. All right, so I'm going to just bypass this for now. Let's go back into here and continue on. So what all of these devices have in common, the ColorMonkey Display, the ColorMonkey Photo, and the iWin Display Pro, is those colors. You can see here's one sitting on the screen. The colors are sent up to the screen. This device measures it, and it records the differences between what it's expecting and what shows up. When they're all done, they automatically apply the profile, put it in the right place. People always ask me, how many Windows users are here? It's usually the Windows users that ask me. One? Oh, there's a Mac crew. Huh? A couple of you. All right. Usually the Windows users ask me, where's the profile? Where does it live? And what I usually tell people is no good can come from you knowing that. Because if you move it or you rename it or anything like that, it will cease to function. X-Rite has a slick little utility called the DNG Profile Manager that allows you to turn profiles on and off and delete them and share them. Okay, so we talked about this. So the next step, we've got our color out of our camera converted correctly because we used the ColorMonkey, or the Color Checker Passport. We have our monitor correct because we've profiled our monitor. The next step is something called soft proofing. And soft proofing is when you go into either Lightroom or Photoshop, and it shows you how your print is going to look before you ever print it. What it does is it simulates the paper profile on the screen so you can see what's going to happen. Now, papers today have gotten really good. In the past, when you used a matte paper, you were going to give a lot of density up. It was going to get, kind of grayish instead of black. No longer the case. However, there are differences on how papers record color. And what a paper profile will do is it'll show what effect is the paper going to have on the print. You can then make adjustments in the software based on what you're seeing on the screen. I want a little more contrast. I want a little more saturation. It will do all that. However, before you do that, you need to understand something called rendering intents. What are rendering intents? Rendering intents deal with colors that are beyond the printable space of the printer. Remember I mentioned your camera captures more color than your monitor can show, and your printer prints more colors than your monitor can show? what are we going to do with these colors that the printer can't print, that the camera captured? So in this graphic here, the circle is representing all the colors that can be printed. And then we have some outliers. Well, what are we going to do with these colors? We have to do something. They have to have some place to go. We can't just leave a hole where those colors used to be. So they have to be moved into the printable space so that the printer can actually print them. And how they are moved is what the rendering intent does. And there are two you're going to use. How many Lightroom people here? Most of you guys? Okay. How many are just Photoshop people? You don't use Lightroom. Okay. Photoshop has 4 rendering intents, 2 of which will just cause you sadness. So they should be hidden. I'll show you them when we get there. Lightroom got rid of the 2 problem ones because they're very specific uses and has 2 relative colorimetric and perceptual rendering. So what do? Let's take a look at perceptual first. Perceptual will take all of these colors that are out of gamut and it's going to move them in. As it moves them in, any colors that are in the way get moved so that the relationship of these previously out of gamut colors to the ones that were in gamut stay the same. So something like this happens. They all move in and the others make room for them so that the relationships stay the same. Now there's a pro and a con to this. The good part is it maintains the color relationships. So gradations are very smooth. It works very good for portraits and skin tones or an image that has a lot of color out of gamut. You might be saying, well, how do I know that? Stay with me, we'll see that in software. The downside is just having a little bit of color out of gamut. Oh, I forgot to mention the phone thing. You get a freebie. Any more phones go off, you have to come up here and dance. And if you want to call Brenda, I'll give you her number. Where was I? Yes, even just a little bit of color out of gamut can cause an overall color shift in the image. So, but you'll see it, and you can then make an adjustment to that color before it happens. The other one, relative colorimetric, does the same thing. It's going to move these colors that are out of gamut. The difference is it's not going to move any of the colors that are already in. So they just kind of get stuck in places that they fit in. Again, pro and con. Good part, doesn't really cause a big color shift on the image. Downside, because the relationship between the colors has changed, you can cause artifacts and banding, particularly in a deep blue sky that is cloudless. So you'll have that deep graduation from up high down to the horizon that if you use relative colorimetric and there's a lot of color out of gamut, you'll start to see bands. It'll actually break up that smooth gradation. So that's the danger of it. So how do you pick? That's where soft proofing comes in. So let's go ahead and do that. What we're going to do is I'm going to start in Lightroom. I'm going to use Lightroom's Develop module. For those of you that are just Photoshop people, Lightroom's Develop module is the same thing as Adobe Camera Raw. It has some added features, but in essence, it's the same software. It's where the raw conversion is taking place, and then you make your edits. So let's go into Lightroom first, and then we'll jump into Photoshop. So let me bring up a picture of the color checker first. So here's our color checker. Let's make some more screen real estate here. And as I mentioned, you just literally take a picture of the thing, and you do have to make sure that it is not overexposed. You can't have any of the patches on here clipping. So if we look at the histogram, we can see we went clear from black to white, and nothing is clipped. There's nothing flashing. Actually, let's zoom in on this a bit. Let's go 1 to 4 so we can see the target a little better. And so there it is. Now, this monitor, by the way, is pretty good. This is a pretty good match to my screen, which is also calibrated. Even with your own eyes, looking at this color checker here, can you see how much deeper these blues are than they are up there? So what's going to happen is, for some reason, we've all been living with the Adobe standard conversion, which converts your raw files into something the software can use. But you end up losing these blues, this kind of aubergine and pink, and you'll find this red and this green are going to move a bit as well. So right at the beginning, as soon as we bring our raw files into Photoshop or Lightroom, we're losing color because you're living with the Adobe standard. What you need is something that is going to capture the actual color, the way your camera records it. And since these are known values, you need to create a custom camera profile. Now what a custom camera profile does is it adjusts, one, the way your camera captures color, and two, for changes in the spectrum of the light. Excuse me. So what does that mean? Well, when you're out in sunlight, sun has a certain spectra. It's continuous spectrum light. Well, what happens if you're photographing someone under fluorescent tubes? Fluorescent tubes are not continuous light. They have certain spikes and valleys of color. Most standard fluorescent tubes have a very strong green spike in them. Guess what? Your eyes can't see it. Your eyes automatically filter it out. For the same reason that if you're looking at a white piece of paper, even under a tungsten light, it still looks white to you. Your eye knows that's supposed to be white. It's called chromatic adaptation. It just says, yeah, it's white, go with it. Same thing with that green spike. But what ends up happening is if you just shoot it, all you do is a white balance. What ends up happening is the opposite color gets diminished. It starts to get canceled out. What's the opposite of green? Magenta. Magenta is the opposite of green. So anything with a strong red component in it is going to get diminished. A couple years ago, I was photographing a gymnastics meet with my niece. And in this gym, what's beeping? You ran out of paper? In this gym, we're alternating tungsten and sodium vapor lights on the ceiling. So the color, even to your eyes, was like this kind of sickly creamsicle orange color. And the girls' uniforms were blue, silver, and white. The blue was very similar to what you're wearing, like that. However, the orange color of the sodium vapor lights was almost exactly the opposite of the blue they were wearing. So even to your own eyes, the blues started to turn gray. So I took a picture of this thing underneath this weird lighting situation, and the software looks at it and says, holy cow, what happened to my blues? That's actually what it says. It says, holy cow, yes. And the software says, well, I need my blues back, so it knows how to boost certain colors and diminish other colors so that the blue actually shows up. Created the profile, applied it to all the images. All of a sudden, all my images looked like I was looking at all the girls under daylight. That's what a custom camera profile does. Now, it's very complicated to create one. You ready for this? All right. You want to see how difficult this is? All right. So you take a picture of the thing under the light source that you're going to be using. You don't need a lot of them. I take one for daylight, cloudy, shade, and then any kind of artificial lights I use, my speed lights, my strobes, or if I hit some kind of mixed lighting situation. Take a picture of it. Install the software for the Color Checker Passport, which is free. You can get it on xrightphoto.com. You go to Export with Preset, and it shows up after you've installed it. There it is. Right in Lightroom, Export with Preset, Color Checker Passport. Click on that, and it says, OK, give it a name. I'm just going to call it B&H Day. And save. That's it. That's how complicated it is to create a custom camera profile. That's all there is to it. Now, like any good cooking show, I had one in the oven for you, so we don't have to wait. You see up on the top, it says processing profile. It usually takes about 45 seconds, but Lightroom does need to be restarted to see a profile after you create it. So we'll skip that part. And I'm going to apply the profile for this place right here. Now, two things are going on. One, the white balance is a little off. Even to me, you can see these grays are a little yellow. And if we go in and look up let's go to the develop module. If we go into develop and we look at basic, we'll see that as shot, it says 7250. Well, I happen to know 7250 is the cloudy setting on my camera. Now, even though if you're shooting raw, there is no color temperature built in, there's no color space, none of that. But it will take whatever your camera was set at as a starting point. Oh, by the way, sidebar, I get this question all the time, so let's just put it to bed. Oh, software said, yeah, it's been made. That sRGB, Adobe RGB setting on your camera, which one should you choose? Doesn't matter. That's only for JPEGs. The raw thing ignores all that, so it's only if you're shooting JPEGs. So I've got let's get my white balance picker, and I'm gonna pick off of the white target. And you can, I don't know if you can see these numbers. Oh, you got monitors up on the side. So you see 85.9, 83.6, 78.2. It's yellow. It was set for cloudy, no surprise there. So I click on that, and now it's neutral again. However, if we scroll down, Camera calibration is where the profile is. And it's the same thing in Adobe Camera Raw. And you see this thing, the Adobe standard. It's generic, it's safe, and it's costing you a boatload of color. Let's go ahead and apply the profile that I created for this. This happened to be in Zion, so let's Zion Daylight. I mentioned those colors. Let me hide this other part so we can see all the colors. Take a look at those, particularly the blues, and I'll go back and forth so you can see it. Watch what happens to the blues when I apply the custom profile. Do you see all those colors just jump? Now does it look more like that thing right in front of you? Now I've got a correct white balance and all my colors are correct. Now, landscape or portrait editing, color is somewhat subjective. You're going to flavor it to your likings. But by doing this and then applying it to all the images you took on this location, your basic color editing is done. Everything has been put in its right place. Fun story. I was in Zion, and I'm actually filming a video out there. And we're hiking on this trail, and this guy comes by, he was a photographer. And he said, "What are you doing? What is that thing?" So I explained it to him. I said, it does custom camera profiles, so it nails color where you having to worry about it. He said, "Would this help me?" He said, "About 7 years ago, I got sick. And when I came out of it, I was colorblind." And he was a photographer. He said, "I had to give up color photography and switch to black and white." I said, "If you do this and just forget about doing any other color editing in the software and just trust what this is doing and then send it out to your prints, they're going to be correct. Even if you can't see it, the rest of the world will." He said, "You're kidding." I said, "No." I got an email from him 2 or 3 weeks later. He said, "You brought color printing back into my life with this one device because now I don't have to worry about it." So it really is that good. Doesn't it make you want to play? But really, the end of the story is this thing is phenomenal because I can now take these are all shot all over the place, but just for example, if I then just select all the images in the shoot, click on Synchronize, and I want white balance, process version, and calibration, and again, this will be on the video. Click on Synchronize, and it applies that color settings and the white balance to all the images. And that's it. My basic color editing is done. You can then again flavor to taste, but your basics will all be perfectly done. That's the value of this thing. So I can't gush enough about this thing. It's the best. You guys are photographers and you're here in B&H. So like me, you guys have boxes and closets of crap you've bought over the years that you've never used again. Because we're photographers, we're gear hounds. This is one that you will not do that with. That I can promise you. I have boxes of crap that I can't even give away. So as I'm sure you all do too. So I would just click on Synchronize and that's it. So to show you a real world example, let me turn this off. Let me go back to because I had just applied it. So here's, as it hopefully starts to actually draw in, there we go. So there's a view of Grand Teton. And lovely, but again, the blues are off. The sky is off. So what do? I apply my profile, which in this case I have one called Grand Teton, and watch the sky. Do you see the sky just jump into place? And there it is. That's what it's supposed to look like. How many of you guys have been out to the Southwest, desert Southwest? For us Easterners, when you go out there, doesn't the sky look wrong? It just looks too blue. And if you show it to someone that's never been out there print, you say, "Oh, you photoshopped that because it looked wrong." No, that's really what it looks like. If you live with the Adobe standard, you're not going to get it. You're going to have to go in and try to bring it all back. This thing with one click or a couple of clicks, and it's done. So that's why that is so important. So while we're in here, we've got a calibrated monitor, and I want to send this print out to the lab. What do I have to do to make that happen? It's actually fairly simple at this point. So however many images I have, I want to send this to my lab. Let's check. Now we can click on soft proofing, but in this case it probably really isn't that necessary. But we can see if there's certain colors we're going to lose or diminish a little bit. Because when you're going out to a lab printers work in sRGB. It's a shock to a lot of people. But they're actually not that big a color space, regular mini lab. Now, if you go out to a large format inkjet printer or one of these, They can actually print beyond Adobe RGB. But a lab printer is designed for sRGB. So there's certain colors you're going to sacrifice going out to a lab printer. So in Lightroom, there's this thing called soft proofing. So you create a proof copy. Yes, we know. And stop it. And the default is Adobe RGB. Well, that doesn't help me because I'm going out to an SR. There's that P3 color space, by the way. That's the new Apple space. I don't know what that's all about. So I click on sRGB, and then I can click back and forth between perceptual and relative. Now, in this case, I'm not going to see anything happen. Why? Because my monitor is sRGB. It can't show me a difference. However, I can click on here to see if there are any colors the monitor can't even display. See what just happened up here? It's showing me that color can't even be displayed correctly. There's also a thing over here that will tell me what colors can't be printed. That's this right up here. See all that stuff that turned red? Those are colors that are beyond the gamut of sRGB. They are going to move. Fortunately, in this case, since it's an sRGB monitor, you're seeing ahead of time how they're going to move. But it's giving you a warning to let you know those are not printable colors on a lab printer. They're going to move. So you can see where we've sacrificed a little bit of color already. Is there anything we could do about it? I could go in. I'll show you a way around it. If I went into Use Saturation and Luminance, I happen to know that in most cases it's a saturation issue. It's certain very dark colors can't be printed in sRGB. So if I go to Saturation and click on here and drag down, so you can see as I change this, I'm just bringing the saturation up and down. I can bring that down so that I can really literally see the color that's going to print. So that's the Use Saturation, Luminance in Lightroom. Yes, it'll be on the video also. And you can see the same thing's happening here. This blue, and as I bring the saturation down, that's how this image is going to print. And based on this, I can decide, well, do I need to make any more adjustments to it? I've sacrificed a little bit of color. What can I do to add a little bit back? Well, what I could do, let me turn off the monitor warning. I'll add a little more contrast into it maybe. So let's just go into Basic. Let me minimize the soft proofing window. I'm going to add a little contrast to it, open up the shadows a little more, so I can get it maybe a little sexier. I can try to add a little bit of vibrance. Oh, I like that. And then I can go full screen and say, okay, I can be comfortable knowing that this is what's going to come back from the lab. Now, if you're doing your own printing, you have a lot more color to deal with than going out to a lab print. Actually beyond Adobe RGB, and we're going to see that next. Let's see this process in Photoshop. In fact, let's see. Let's take a different image. Let's take this one. Now I'm going to use Lightroom as my Adobe Camera Raw, so I'm just going to open up this image in Photoshop, which in Lightroom is just Command or Control E. Excuse me, and that will automatically use Lightroom as its Adobe Camera Raw converter and put this file into Photoshop. Now, Photoshop has a lot more options. And here it's going to go. Now, before we actually do anything to this in Photoshop, I want to show you something about custom paper profiles. So let me go ahead and bring up the Color Monkey photo. I hope this doesn't ask me for a software update too. Sandra's going to yell at me if it does. Let's see, let's quit the Color Monkey display software and let's fire up the Color Monkey photo software, which is going to look very similar. The difference will be, of course there is. The difference is you now have Profile My Printer as an option. By the way, match my printer to my display. It does do that, but don't think that your printer or your display have any kind of relationship whatsoever. They don't know each other is there. When you choose this, it's going to create a profile for your display to make your display as accurate as it can be. it will then create a profile for your paper so it will be as accurate as it can be. But understand there are two different ways of looking at color. One is backlit RGB. The other one is CMYK inks that are dependent upon whatever light is hitting it to show you the colors. So we're just going to create a profile for a printer, and you tell it which printer you want to print on, and we have the Epson 600 here, and give it a name. I happen to have some paper for Ilford's Fine Art Smooth here, so I'm going to call it, and I'll show you why later, I'm going to call it CMP Ilford's Fine Art Smooth Epson P600. The reason for this is, and this is just my way of doing this, I start all of my custom paper profiles with CMP because it stands for Color Monkey Photo, because when you go to look for them, they're listed alphabetically. So they'll all be stuck together. So then I click on Next, and it says, all right, print the target out. Again, I already did that, so you would click on Print, and I might need a different cable. Where's the official cable? That's not it. There we go. Let's plug in an official cable for this. Hopefully it won't give me a hard time. It's going to give me a hard time. You know why? Because of software. But I say, the heck with it. I'm just going to show you. They do this to me all the time. Software updates without telling. Maybe I should turn on auto update. Just do it. Okay, I'll just show you the process. It's actually very simple. You print out the target, and guess what comes out? This is what comes out of the printer. Very simple. Actually, it's this one first. You read these in using this device, and it is simple as you click on the side of it. You have to start on white and end on white. You click and drag, and it is literally that fast. You just do each row. Click and drag across, and you read in these 5 rows, which equals 50 patches. And you might think, well, 50 colors, that's not really all that much for creating a custom printer paper profile. But what it then does is it takes what it learned from this one, and it prints out a second set of patches, which then have the information provided from the first group to further fine-tune these. So by doing it in a 2-step procedure like this, even though it's 100 patches you're printing, it's like having many hundreds more because it is then doing that piece. So that creates a custom paper profile. But you might say, but Joe, can't I just use the factory profile? You would say that. You might say that. So can I just use the factory profile? All of the paper manufacturers and printer manufacturers offer you a set of profiles to download, and they will get you part of the way there. But we don't want part of the way there. I want to get everything out of my paper and printer I can. I want to print once. So on the Mac, there's a utility called ColorSync, which will allow us to see the profile. So I'm going to show you the created profile versus the factory one. So if I come down to Users, here is the factory profile from Ilford for Fine Art Smooth. Now what is this showing us? Here's black. Here's white. So it's obviously the paper is white, so yes, it can do white. But it's showing that it can't do 100% black. It's a matte fine art paper. You're expecting it the blacks to be off a little bit. And then it's showing, coming up from there, and you can rotate it in 3D space. This is all of the colors that this paper printer combination can print. Well, that's all lovely. It doesn't mean anything to you until you have something to compare it to. So let's take the custom profile that I created with the Color Monkey, and we'll overlay it. So I'm going to hold this and bring in my paper profile, my custom profile. Oh, it's right here, actually, this one. And you see now all of the blue, it's bigger. We've lost them. So you can really see what just happened. Let me switch them around. Let me hold the custom profile and overlay the factory profile to it. So here's the factory profile. Inside, it's the one in color, and this ghosted white area is the custom paper profile. Now, this factory profile is not terrible. It's okay. But there's 2 things going on that can cause potential problems. One, I'm sacrificing these deep colors. Now, you guys remember when we did the rendering intents. If I happen to have colors that in my image that reside in this area, the rendering intent isn't going to put them there. It's going to push them all the way over into this color area because that's the factory profile. Also, notice, guess what? I can actually get black. We're very close to solid black. And the factory profile is causing me to sacrifice that. So what I'm saying is the custom profile is giving you everything that it actually can do. Now, on the other side, there's another slight issue. You see this bulge here? This is the factory profile. It's sticking outside of the custom profile. What does that mean? That means the factory profile is saying you can print these colors when in reality you cannot. They're going to move. Again, rendering intent-wise, if you have a color in your image that's in this area, the rendering intent's going to leave it there if you use the factory profile. When in reality, it can't print that color. And any colors that are in here are going to get pushed to what actually can be printed, and they're going to get bunched up together, which can cause artifacts and banding. That is the advantage of having the custom paper profile versus the factory profile. Even though this factory profile is not terrible, but if you want to get everything out of your paper, and for me, what's very important on these matte papers is down here, these deep shadows. The fact that I can actually almost get 100% black when the factory profile was going to cost me some of that black. So that's the advantage of having a custom profile. So let's see this used in Photoshop. So how do you soft proof in Photoshop? It's a little more complicated, but it gives you a lot more options as well. In Photoshop, you go to View, Proof Setup, Custom. And then you have a whole bunch of choices. Now here's my custom profile. You can see CMP, Fine Art Smooth. And we have rendering intents and a bunch of buttons here that should not be here. So let's put it back to, we'll put it to Adobe RGB. All right, so there's Adobe RGB. And we can look at perceptual versus relative. Here's the other two that I mentioned, saturation and absolute. Only sadness will ensue if you choose either of those two. So don't do it, just these two. So let's see if there's a difference between perceptual and relative. And in this case, in Adobe RGB, no. But we're not printing in Adobe RGB, we're printing on our paper. So let's bring up our custom profile for the paper. Here it is, Fine Art Smooth. And did you see the image behind change? Watch when we switch from perceptual to relative. You see the color change happening and the brightness change? So perceptual in this case is somewhat brighter. The fact that there is a change as you bounce back and forth means there are colors in this image that are out of gamut. If there are no colors out of gamut, then it actually doesn't matter which rendering intent you use. But in this case, there are. Let's just leave this here. I happen to I think I like the perceptual better. Yeah, I like the brightness of it, so I'm going to go perceptual. However, I like the depth in this part of the image of the relative, so we have to adjust that. By the way, these other buttons, preserve RGB numbers. Never click that. That should be hidden. Also, down here there's display options, and what this is supposed to do is simulate the effect that the paper will have on the actual density of the print. This has been in Photoshop for at least 10 years, and they still haven't gotten it right. You would think they would be better at it. It is way too strong. If I click on Simulate Paper Color, you see how washed out it just got when I did that? Look at that, look at the difference. It's saying that this paper is going to make the blacks go that way. Spoiler alert, here's the print on this paper that we just profiled. Does it look anywhere as washed out as that? No. So it's a worthless button. Think of it as a spare button you can click on if you're extremely bored, but other than that, do not use it. So let's don't use those ones. It's 10 years this has been going on, it still doesn't work. Stop it. It's almost like it must be a joke inside Adobe. Now, while we're in here, under View, you can see that Proof Colors is checked. That means we are looking at this image through the paper profile. and this is checked. So we're actually seeing this through the Fine Art paper profile. Also, there's a thing here, gamut warning. So if we click on that, whoa. See all that stuff that turned green? Those are colors that are in this image that this paper can't print. Those are all the colors that are going to move. Now, there's nothing I can do to make them print. It's just warning us that these are the colors that are going to shift. Now, by the way, mine's green. If you haven't ever done this before, yours is in gray. It's under Preferences, under, where is it? Transparency and Gamut. The gamut warning color. The default is this gray, which you can't see, so I like to use the lime green. It's easier to see. So this is saying that these are the colors that are going to move. By the way, let's just take a look at another paper profile. Let's see what happens if we choose some kind of glossy stock. So let's see, what do I have glossy here? Let's look at Epson Metallic Glossy. Did you see how less of it is green now? So what it's showing you is that a glossy stock has got more range. As you expect, you lose some density and saturation on a matte stock. It soaks into the paper a little bit, and it reflects light differently. So no surprise, but this image just happens to have colors that none of these printers are going to print. This is a 12-ink, no, this is an 8-ink printer. This is an 8-ink printer. I have a 12-ink printer at home. It just can't do it. So that's the danger. Your camera can capture colors. And here's the other thing. When you do print this, this is way beyond what your sRGB monitor can show you. So it's warning you that these colors are going to shift, but leave it alone, because you're actually going to be able to print more color than you can see on your screen. So just go with it. So let's put our paper profile back. We are going to choose our Fine Art Smooth. There we go. And let's turn off the gamut warning. So we're in Perceptual. Now in Photoshop, you have the ability to use Photoshop's layers and adjustments to shape this image specifically for this paper. So I look at this and I see, well, it's gotten a little light up on the top. So I'm going to create a, let's see, let's do a curves adjustment layer. And I'm just going to use the finger pointy thing. And I'm going to push down up on the top here and open up that a little bit. And I'm going to push the highlights up a little. Now, I did this to the entire image. And I can turn this on and off. And I can see, all right, I did it a little too much. I like what it did around the edges on the top. I want to leave it alone in the middle, since I have a mask here. Let me get myself a brush. How do you guys change brush size in Photoshop? Brackets? Okay, you're never going to do that again. No more brackets. Here's how you do it. On a Mac. Control Option and click. As you drag left and right, it makes the brush bigger and smaller. As you, I'll get, yep. Up and down, edge hardness. On a PC, it's Control right click. Control right click. So you'll never use that again. So I've got my mask here. I'm going to work at 50%. How do you guys change the opacity of your brushes? Numbers? Yeah, so if I want to do 30%, I just type in 3 on my keyboard. It does 30%. So I'm going to use black to start to mask, let's do 50%. I'm going to mask out some of the effect of that curves adjustment to the middle of the image so that I get my colors, and now I can turn this on and off, and you can see what I did was basically darken the edges to get so the image has a little more impact. And what I'll do when I'm working on an image like this is I won't just leave it as curves. I'll call it FAS for Fine Art Smooth, so that I know this is an adjustment specifically for this paper. So if I'm going to print this image on matte and gloss and metallic, I'm going to want to have different adjustments for each paper because each paper is going to create color differently. So I want to print this. Oh, I want to save it. I want to save it to send out to a lab. That'll be the first part. So what I need to do first is I need to go to Edit, Convert to Profile, and I need to make sure that this is an sRGB file. By the way, never save an image file with the paper profile in it. You don't want this ever to happen. Don't convert your image to the paper profile, because if you do, and you then send it out to your printer, the printer is going to reprofile it, and you get something called double profiling, and it makes the adjustments twice, and it's bad.
Isn't there a setting somewhere, you mentioned it once, that you can tell through settings which should apply the, it's a preference, which should apply the changes that you were just talking about?
Well, what you mean relative or?
No, it's when you go to convert to profile.
Oh, convert to profile, yeah. You can always go to sRGB. I don't always do that because I'm not always sending out to the lab.
Right.
But yes, that is a good that's an option if that's how you work. So I can just scroll up until I see sRGB, and I want to make sure that that converts to sRGB. Now, if I save this, so I'll save this, I'll do a save as, and I'll put it in my for the lab. I have a folder on my computer called For the Lab so that I know how to get all my images that I'm going to upload. And I want to save it as a JPEG. And you see, embed color profile, sRGB is now the choice. Click on save. And at 100%, or I don't know why 12, but 12 quality. And that file will now come back from the lab looking like this. Now, if we send it out to our printer, we didn't have to do that because we just sacrificed color by converting it to sRGB. So I'm going to back up. I want to be back in ProPhoto RGB. So generally, the general rule of thumb is when you're dealing with color, you should be in ProPhoto RGB all the time. If you're a Lightroom user, you already are. You don't have a choice. That's how Lightroom works. If you're in Photoshop, you want to be in ProPhoto RGB until you're ready to export. So ProPhoto RGB is the biggest color space. Keep your images there so they maintain all their color, and then when you export, you can choose different exports. If you're going out to a lab and they're going to print on a large format inkjet printer, they don't want sRGB. They want Adobe RGB or ProPhoto RGB. So it all depends on what printer is it going on. Is it a standard lab print, or is it what they term a giclée print, which is a fancy French word for inkjet print? That really is. Or if you go out to Canvas or anything like that. Any of you confused about resolution, by the way? This always comes up too, just as a sidebar. People, how much resolution do you need on a print? Numbers? 300. 200. 240, 360. Okay. This is always fun. The magic number is it depends. The human eye doesn't necessarily see resolution, it receives resolving power of things next to each other. Have you ever been driving late at night and you see a car coming at you from far away and it's just a single light? And then as it gets closer, eventually you see the two headlights. That's because your eyes have an angle of view. They can see a certain angle. It all depends on viewing distance. The maximum, now, I don't see any 18-year-olds here. The maximum resolution a normal human eye, unaided, can see is around 320 dpi. That is at a viewing distance of 4 inches. Now, normal people don't look at prints from 4 inches away. You're photographers. You're a pain in the butt. Photographers, you'll always see. You can always pick out the photographers in the group because they'll go up to something and they go. Normal viewing is about 20 inches for a normal size print. So 20 inches away, about like that. That's how a normal person's going to look at a print. In fact, here, this is 19-inch paper. Yeah, 20 inches away. What is your eyesight at 20 inches away? If your eyesight is perfect or corrected to be perfect, it's 170 dpi. It's all the human eye can see at 20 inches away. That's it. So you need much less resolution than you think you do. If you go out to Canvas, most Canvas printers, particularly one I use a place called CG Pro Prints in Colorado. Phenomenal. Their Canvas printing is done at 150 dpi because the Canvas grain is adding so much noise, in essence, into the paper that's all they need, 150. 300 is a holdover from commercial printing. I used to be an art director. So people carry these numbers over, and 360 is something else. art directors always wanted to have twice the resolution of the actual line screen of the print. Magazines were printed at 150, unless it was Architectural Digest or something like that, which was printed at 188. So there's where your 300 and 360 come from, 150 times 2, 180 times 2, so that they had lots of wiggle room. They could change the size of the print, they could crop it differently, and they had a lot of place to work. In reality, when you're going out to print, if you're really bored one day, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're watching TV, you've got Cheetos crumbs all over your chest, try this instead. Go to your printer, print out the same image at 150, 240, 300, and put them down on the table and see if you can see the difference in any of them. The answer is going to be you won't. So we've all been fed this 300 DPI nonsense. It has nothing to do with these printers. Most monitors are between 102 and 120 DPI now. The Retina displays are actually 300. But most displays are around 125 or so. So just send the image up at whatever, 19. Really, don't even forget about the resolution. Just do a pixel size. So if you want your image to be half of the screen, well, a 27-inch monitor is 1920. Do half that. Send up your images at 1,000 pixels across. Don't worry about DPI. Just make sure your file size is 1,000 pixels across. And figure it this way. If you need 150 DPI to make a print, at least, what's 1,000 divided by 150? You know, what is that, 6, 7? In between 6 and 7 inches. If you go out to a printer, and again, it's going to be a specific lab, if they're going out to a 12-ink inkjet, or they're going out to something like this printer called the Durst Lambda, the really high-end prints that can print ProPhoto RGB space on really glossy stock, then you will get that. And just as Brenda just gave me this print of the
Speaking of saturated colors.
yeah, of the image we just had up on the screen. So there's proof that once you create a profile and you send it out to your printer, this was her first try, and I'll show you this. I'll bring this image up too. And we'll leave these up here, you can see them. By the way, the fact that these are daylight lights is a very important part, because then what are you looking at your prints under? First of all, let your prints sit for at least 10 minutes, because as they dry, most inks will darken a smidge. So don't look at them right away. At the very least, go out and buy yourself some daylight light bulbs, some light tubes, and put them in a lamp that you're going to look at your prints under. All of this monitor profiling and stuff we're doing assumes that the print is going to be viewed under daylight, not under tungsten lights, because tungsten lights are yellow. Fluorescent lights are going to have those spikes in them. This is where daylight versus monitor color gets a little screwy, because your monitor's at 6500K, daylight's around 5000. So you would think that's going to be a big difference. But because a monitor is a backlit thing, and the native white point of monitors is 6500K, that makes white look correct. When you're looking at a print with reflected light, all of the ambient environment starts to play in. For technical reasons, which we won't go into, a 6500K monitor matches a 5000K print viewed under daylight. I was doing a training at a lab, one of the labs that did not believe me. I went out to Iowa. I had to go to Iowa for this. You ever been to Iowa? Oh, God. Have you been to Iowa, Brenda? Oh, God, is it a boring place. No joke, I'm driving into this town, and I drive past the Grout Museum. Grout. The Grout Museum. That's a good time in Iowa. So I go into this lab, and I'm teaching them about color workflow and the whole color management. And they have a nice editing room where they had 3 Azo monitors, and Azos, the EIZO, they're still the Rolls-Royce of monitors, with their workstations in this very dim room. And then they had these X-Rite gray tag light booths that had calibrated 5000K UV filtered lights for their viewing. And they had their monitors calibrated to 5000K, and I said, that's wrong. And the president of the company walks in. And I said, this is all set up wrong. I said, I can see it with my eyes. Your colors are off. He said, prove it to me and I'll eat my shoes. Which in Iowa, I guess, is a big thing to do. I said, okay, so I recalibrated all of his monitors to D65. And they have test prints they print in their lab. So we had the prints done. I hang them in each booth, and he comes in, he looks at the monitor, he looks at the viewing booth, which is right next to each monitor, and he goes over the next one and the next one. And he leaves. That's it.
Without issues.
He still had his shoes on. So that afternoon, I'm doing a training session for their customer service people on how to talk to their customers about color. And as I'm standing in there, this is ACI. As I'm standing in there teaching this class, he walks in with his shoes in his hand and a salt and pepper shaker. He said, I never thought it'd be right, but you proved me wrong. So that's another thing about printing. Never resize. Don't do it. Here's why. When you're going out to a lab, the drivers in the mini labs are very sophisticated bits of software. You give them the best file you've got. If it needs to be rezzed up or down, their software knows how to do it to their machine. Don't you do it. Now, rezzing down is okay if you have a file. My main camera is a Sony a7R II. So it's a 42 megapixel full frame camera. Well, if I'm going to print out a 4x6, it's theoretical, I don't print 4x6s, but if I did, sending them a 42 megapixel file for a 4x6 would be gross overkill. So that I would downsize. But I print big. My small prints are 16. I go 16 by 20 and up. Most of my prints are 30, 40 and bigger than that. I never change the size. Don't up-res. Just take a look at it and make sure. Let's take a look at this file that you bring that up. How big is this? Let's go look at image size. Okay, so let's look at it in pixels. Okay, so this particular image right now is cropped to 6300 by 5000 pixels at 240 DPI. Again, that by the way, the 240 comes from, that is the glossy inkjet standard. That's what Epson decided. This is the most dots per inch you can resolve on a glossy Epson stock. And it goes down from there as you go to fine art stocks. That's their maximum DPI that they can resolve on their printers. So that's where the 240 comes from. But let's go back to inches. So it's saying that at 240 pixels per inch, this is a 21 by 26 inch print. Well, let's say I click off resample. I want this to be a 30 inch tall print. And it says, okay, it's 24 by 30 at 211 DPI. Again, going back to our printing resolution at 20 inch viewing distance, I only need 170. What I'm saying is that 170 and up, your eyes are not going to be able to distinguish. So as long as you at least have 170, you're fine. That whole 300 DPI thing, let it go. Let it go. You don't need it. So there, that's a 24 by 30 print with no problems. Okay, so we have our print ready. Now we want to send it out to our printer. So now I'm just going to click on print. And obviously the paper size is all wrong. Don't worry, we'll make it at least the right orientation. Okay. The print settings need to match, obviously, the paper. So you do want to have that if it's a matte paper, do make sure it's a matte paper. Do you need to print super photo versus super fine? Well, it's 2880 DPI. That must be better. Has nothing to do with resolution. It's how much ink it's throwing down. Guess what? You're going to use 4 times as much ink on a super photo as you are on a regular, on the one above it, the super fine. It's just throwing more ink down. It's not resolution, it's ink volume. Do you need it? No. Epson would love you to leave. It's like the same people who came up with that shampoo thing. Apply, lather, rinse, repeat. So you use twice as much shampoo. This is making you use twice as much ink. Is the quality of the print any better? No. It's not resolution. It's DPI, which means dots per inch of ink. All these printing people are very guilty of mixing DPI and PPI, which is actual pixels per inch. This is dots per inch, not pixels per inch. So this isn't high resolution, it's more ink. Do you need it? No. This print right here, which is quite saturated, thank you, is printed on Superfine, not Superphoto. Do you need more saturation than this? No. You don't. So, Epson people, if they were here, they'd probably be like plotting my murder, but. So that's, Superfine's fine. High speed versus not. What high speed simply means is the printer is going to print in both directions. It's going to print as it's going back and forth. Why would you not do that? Your printer's getting old. You're having a problem with the ink heads, and you're starting to get lines, maybe a little bit. Turn off high speed. But other than that, high speed is not costing you anything, so leave it alone. Finest detail, yeah, what does that mean? I think it's an extra button they just put in there to make you feel good. It's like the contrast slider in, I'll show you, there's a bonus slider in Lightroom I can show you. No one knows what it does. No one's seen anything that it does, but it's there, so if you feel the need to slide something, you can. Finest detail, yeah, whatever. Yeah, give me the finest detail. Then I just click on print. Click on save that. Oh, obviously, Photoshop must, huh?
That's what I was talking about before.
Oh, yeah, Photoshop must manage colors. If we let printer manage colors, then everything we just did was a waste of time. We don't want the printer to manage colors. Photoshop needs to. We're telling it the profile to use. Which profile is it going to use? There is my Color Monkey Fine Art Smooth profile. So yes, use that. 16-bit data. These printers support it. If your printer doesn't support it, that box will just be grayed out anyway. Normal printing. Yes. Rendering intent. I wish this carried through. But for some reason, the last way you left your image before you actually go to print, it doesn't carry the rendering intent back into the print dialog. So you do have to remember that you chose perceptual versus relative. Black point compensation, yes. All this stuff below, don't concern yourself. No reason for you to do it. Now, this image is in ProPhoto RGB. Why do I care? Because this printer can print beyond Adobe RGB. It doesn't go all the way out to ProPhoto RGB, but it can print beyond. And I can prove it to you. I can show it to you. Show you. So I'm going to hit done. Let's go back into ColorSync. All right, so here, let's bring up, here's my Fine Art Smooth paper. Let's hold this. And I'm going to overlay Adobe RGB on top of this. Here's Adobe RGB in color. Well, yeah, it's bigger than my printer profile. However, you see those spots where my printer profile is sticking out? That's beyond Adobe RGB. In these particular colors, out there and up in here, my printer can actually print beyond Adobe RGB. That's why I need to leave it in ProPhoto RGB so I don't get rid of these colors.
You said before that what that was bulging out is not going to show.
Depends on which I had on top. This is with Adobe. Let's save Adobe RGB. We'll hold that one, and we'll put the printer profile on top. It's just a matter of who's on top, and I'm not going there, so don't try it. So here it is reversed. Now the ghosted white one is Adobe RGB, and the color one is my actual paper profile. I just reversed who's who. All of this color can be printed, but it's beyond Adobe RGB. That's why you need to stay in ProPhoto RGB when you're going out to these printers. Because if you don't, you're going to, in essence, cut off all that color. They won't be able to print it. It'll have to move it into a different color. I know this is, I'm throwing a lot at you. This is the deep end of the pool. That said, remember, and I don't feel guilty throwing you in the deep end of the pool because of these videos that are going to be up in the next day. They're all there. I'll give you the website. Go take a look if there's something you want to go over, and they're broken up. The first one is an intro to everything we talked about. The second one is just for printing to the lab, and the only device it talks about is using this thing and how you use it. Then going out to your own printer. That's broken into two pieces. One, how to create these things, and then two, how to soft-proof in Photoshop and Lightroom. It's all up there. All the videos are about 10 minutes or so long. You can start and stop. You can brush the Cheetos off your chest, whatever. Okay.
What are the titles we should be looking for again, please?
I'll give you a website to go on to. I'm not sure how long they'll take to get up to xrightphoto.com.
No,
Yeah? Okay.
probably by tomorrow.
Oh, really? Okay. All right, well, in that case, check xrightphoto.com. If for some reason they're delayed, not that X-Right's ever delayed putting stuff up before, if that were to happen, if you go to, I'll give right this part you write down, go to jbphotographyshop.com. jbphotographyshop.com. That's my website just for my how-to videos. And it's actually from there, it's gonna, you can also get them on YouTube. And that's where these will, they'll it's actually on my business card. It's my cell phone. So, by the way, yes, you got questions? Send me an email. I'm happy to. Phone calls, don't always answer. Emails, except if I'm traveling, I'm pretty good. Just give me a couple of days to catch up. But do you see this? I hope this kind of clearly explains why Adobe RGB is not enough. Because you're sacrificing. If you go to Adobe RGB, you're losing all this color. So if you're going out to a printer that can do full color, you want to stay in ProPhoto RGB. And one thing I did not cover that I'll show you, and that's in Photoshop, and that's your color preferences, which is under color settings, under edit. Let me just show you this. This is something you're going to want to change if you haven't done it, because the default is wrong for most people. Let me bring up the defaults so you can see what they are.
Is this in Lightroom also, or just?
No, this Photoshop. Let's see. What is it? Standard prepress? General purpose. Yeah, that's the default. So these are the settings, the color settings in Photoshop that you do not want to have. Photoshop years ago assumed everything you were going to do was going to go up on the web. The web is sRGB. But you're doing photography. You don't want that. So working space, the default used to be, it still is sRGB. You don't want that. You want it to be ProPhoto RGB. So make sure ProPhoto RGB is your option. CMYK, color space. You don't care. You're not a commercial printer. That's who that's for. If you're running a printing press in your house, then all right, maybe you want it. But other than that, you don't care about that. Gray, you don't care about that either. It's all print. That's all pre-press stuff. Here's what's important. Down below, the color management policies. You always want to preserve the embedded profile. What that means is if you bring in an image that's already in sRGB into your default ProPhoto RGB workspace, you don't want it to do anything. Just leave it alone. It will open. Think of ProPhoto as a big bucket, and sRGB is this big. It's going to fit in the big bucket, so just leave it alone. If I converted an sRGB file to ProPhoto RGB, all it is, it's going to be this little thing with all this blank space around it. You're not adding any color to it. So if you just choose embedded profiles, fine. Now there is some options down here. Profile mismatches. When are they going to happen? You can say ask when opening. Do not ever check that, because then every image you open, it's going to ask. It's annoying. Ask when pasting, you might. And where that happens is, let's say you want to change a sky in an image. You want to add some clouds or something, and you have a cloud file that's in sRGB, and your image is in ProPhoto RGB. That'll give you a warning to let you know the color space is different. Do you care? Not really. You can't do anything about it. It's just, yeah, that's nice. Missing profiles, ask when opening. You probably should choose that. There's only one time you're going to have a missing profile, and that's if someone screen captured something and sent it to you. Because screen captures generally do not have a profile attached to them. So if somebody copied something off of a screen and gives you the file, it won't have a profile attached to it. That's generally the only time that they're missing. All of these other numbers on the side, there's a default conversion, which is relative color metric. Do you care? Whatever. You're going to check them both anyway, so it doesn't matter what the default is. The color conversion engine, you do not care. Actually, really, the rest of the stuff you don't care. This is what you care about: ProPhoto and maybe missing profiles. That's it. and save it. Save it as your defaults, and I'll just call it defaults. And you can put a description, which is silly because it's your computer. Now you are always working in ProPhoto RGB. One of the reasons that's important is if you're using Lightroom and Photoshop together. Lightroom by default always works in ProPhoto RGB. Anybody want to challenge that? No? Okay. You could have, because it's actually slightly wrong. Lightroom uses a variation of ProPhoto RGB. Actually called Lisa RGB. If you're ever on Jeopardy and anybody asks that. It's a slightly different gamma contrast thing, but it's ProPhoto RGB. But Lightroom always does that. Lightroom doesn't assign a color space until you export a file. While you're in Lightroom, you're staying in ProPhoto RGB. In fact, while you're in Lightroom, let's go back into Lightroom a second. While you're in here, all of this stuff you might do to an image, do you understand you're not really doing it? It's just a set of things that if I ever export this thing to somewhere else, do these things to the file. It's non-destructive. So there is no color space, there's no profile, there's none of that. Yes, sir?
Where's that contrast?
Oh, okay.
I want it.
You want it? Okay. It's under detail. So if I go into here, by the way, nobody asked in this print. Sometimes people come up and they say, what is that thing over there? This is one of my favorite places. This is a hidden place. Nobody knows about it except the locals. It's called Canara Falls. It's in Utah near Zion National Park. It's a state park that only the locals know about. It's a 2-mile hike up a mountain to get to it. Have any of you been to the Slot Canyons in Arizona? Imagine the Slot Canyons with a mountain stream and waterfalls running through it. That's what Canara Falls is. It's amazing. And this is what it looks like. This is the ladder to get up to the next part. There's another falls above this. So this thing over here is actually the ladder. The last quarter mile or so, as you're going to this, you have to walk through the river to get to here. But what an amazing place. Highly, highly recommend it. Okay, where is the slider that does nothing?
Is it Photoshop or Lightroom?
Lightroom. It's under noise reduction. Yeah, shut up. It's under noise reduction. So if I add noise reduction under color, illuminance rather, and then I slide this contrast slider back and forth, no one knows what it does. It does nothing. If you hold down Option, it does turn it into a black and white as you slide, and no one still knows what it does. You can drive it all the way back and forth, and no one has a clue what this slider does. So there you go. It's a bonus slider.
Truly non-destructive.
That's really non-destructive. By the way, sharpening, the way sharpening works in Lightroom, as long as we're here, we're kind of going into Lightroom world a little bit. When you're sharpening, in general, you don't want to sharpen everything. Like, I would not want to sharpen the smoothness of the flowing water, because if you add sharpening to it, it just adds noise to it. And there's this masking slider that, if you don't know, well, you have no idea what it's doing. It doesn't look like it's doing anything either. So let me add a bunch of sharpening. Let's go ahead and zoom in again. And right now it's sharpening the entire image. And that means this area here is getting sharpened as well. And if you were to print this out, you'd actually see grain in here. You'll start to see noise. And it would show up very strongly in a solid blue sky, which you don't want. The masking slider underneath will fix this. But unless you hold in the magic Adobe key, you don't know what it's doing. And the magic Adobe key is Option. So if we hold down Option and then click on masking, the entire thing turns white, which means everything's getting the effect. As you drag off to the right, it limits what's getting the sharpening. So if I just want to sharpen edges and I come over to there, now the sharpening is only taking place on the spots in white. All the spots in black do not get the sharpening. So that one does work. You just need to hold down the Option key. This is your bonus slider. You're welcome. Go ahead and slide it. Don't know why it's there, but anyway. Okay, so the question was, you've got an Epson printer, you've got Epson paper, you've downloaded the Epson Pro file. Can I just use that and can I say printer manages color? It will do a better job than not doing anything. However, it's still going to be a lot of variations. You saw even the downloaded factory profile compared to the custom profile had some limitations. So you really want Photoshop to take control of that. You want to have control of it. If you let the printer do it, sometimes it'll be good, sometimes it'll be awful. It's going to depend on the image and the colors that are in it. So you don't want to take that risk. Printer manages color is good for something if you're doing Santa Claus photos, you know, or we have a school photography business out of our studio. So if we're photographing 750 kids and we need to do prints right there or some event, yeah, fine. Printer can manage the colors and we'll get close. But we don't want close. We're doing fine art printing here. We want this print to look exactly the way we want it to. So the answer is do that. Also, Epson's papers, Canon's papers, guess what? A lot of people, other people are making their papers. I have a Canon printer at home, and Brenda, I don't think I ever told you this. I was profiling one of the Canon papers. And I did the profile, and I brought it into the color sync because I wanted to compare it to Adobe RGB and see where I was. And I looked at the profile and said, wait a second, this looks familiar. And it was a Canon fine art paper, a fine art matte paper. And I brought up the Ilford fine art paper profile. I laid it over top of the Canon profile, and they were identical, which meant that was actually Ilford's paper. So a lot of these printer manufacturers, they buy papers from different people and they put their own names on it. They don't make all their papers. So, but did I make it clear that when you create, if you're really into printing and you're going to print on fine art stocks, and it's more the fine art stocks than the glossy stuff. Fine art papers have a lot more variations from printer to printer and from paper to paper. The glossy stocks and the metallic stocks, the factory profiles will be fairly close. Again, still not good enough for me, but you can get by with it. When you're doing the matte papers, the fine art, the watercolors, the canvas papers, custom profiles will get you everything you can possibly get out of that paper. So let's sum up what we've covered. First of all, number one thing, your monitor. If you're not profiling or calibrating your monitor, you need to do that. It's not optional if you're doing your own editing. It's the most important part, just because you're making your edits based on what the monitor is showing you. Also, if you, and I see this all the time also, you have a $3,500 camera body and a $2,500 lens and a $149 monitor from Sam's Club. Where do you think the weak link is there? A monitor is an important part of your whole color workflow. So if you don't have one, seriously consider investing in a good graphics monitor. And it's something that once you have in front of you and once you get used to it, there's no turning back. I did that when I was dating my wife. I loaned her one. I had two Azo monitors. I loaned her one. And actually, I still didn't get it back. It's still up in her office. I married her, and she still has my monitor. So when you have good gear, you get used to it. But once you get used to seeing that what's on that monitor is what comes out of your printer, it's something that you don't want to give up. So the question is, she has an Azo. Azos have these self-calibrating things. That kind of keeps them in the right place, but they also sell a monitor puck, like you saw, like this, that uses their software for the calibration. You still want this. You still want one of these. The self-calibration's better than not calibrating, but it's not the same as actually reading what's coming up onto the screen. So the question, again, because the resolution is beyond what your eyes can see, so our question is, are the Retina displays worthwhile? The answer is yes. They're phenomenal displays. And they are a bigger color space than the old iMacs. They are that P3 thing. That said, when you profile them, which I did with my iMac, the first thing, you will see a fairly drastic change in the actual color and tone of the monitor because they're a little overly saturated. Color's not bad. They don't have that blue shift. They're pretty accurate, but the saturation's way off, and the tonal range is way off. So you need to calibrate it, and then it'll be good. So the question is my Sony closer to real color than a Canon or Nikon? Coming out of the camera, the answer is always going to be no. And this is really a topic for another day, but you got to understand that your camera doesn't see the way you see. And all the cameras, even though you're bringing a RAW file, they're adding a contrast curve and certain color things into the raw file when it's brought into software. So you have to counteract that because a lot of the most dramatic scenes you're going to capture are going to be very high tonal range. So when your raw file is brought in, the raw file gets a contrast added to it because it assumes you're a middle of the day thing and it wants that contrast and pop to it. But if you have a high-end scene, you have to actually counter it. We have a couple minutes. You want to see that? You want me to show you how that works? All right. I'll show you an actual example then. I'll show you what came in on my camera. So to answer your question, the answer is really no. It really didn't look the way I wanted it to. All right. Here's my image. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that great?
Looks like a lot of money.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, isn't it? Would you believe this is a perfect digital capture? Why? Your camera, the best cameras out there, despite what the manufacturers will tell you, which is overblown, is about 8.5 stops. You'll see them advertise 11, 12 stops, it's bogus. 8.5 stops usable tonal range. So what I used is a spot meter because I needed to make sure that I had the detail on this cloud here. Does it look like there's any detail in there? No, not really. If you look at it right up in there, it's pure white because the software is adding a contrast curve already. And it looks like there's nothing going on in here. But when I looked at the histogram in Lightroom, I saw that I had what I was after. Oh, I don't want to let me turn off soft proofing. Look at that histogram. Tell me that's not a sexy histogram. Right over to the left edge. Right over to the right edge. Anything clipping? No. That's because I spot metered it. And look how this all looks like it's gone. My histogram's telling me it's not. Also, the color temperature's way off. Well, let's just, yes, sir.
Why is the left triangle on the histogram purple?
It's turned on.
Oh,
That's just tell you if there was something that was 100% black, it would show you. And if it was anything 100% white. There actually is a little bit of 100% white in there, but that's because the sun's behind it, and that's okay. So there's just with the white balance fixed. Well, what do I need to do to fix this? Because again, even though it's a raw file, Lightroom is applying these contrast curves to it. So my highlights are too bright. Well, let's bring the highlights way down. Well, good, there's my cloud detail. Well, the shadows are way dark. Let's open those up. Now we can increase the mid-tone exposure a little bit. I'll add a little bit of clarity, which is contrast adjustment in the mid-tones. I'll add a little vibrance, which is increasing the saturation of cool and desaturated colors. Little extra saturation there. And lastly, when you have a reflection, the reflection should always be darker than what it is reflecting. In this case, it got a little bit too close. So let's just do a graduated filter. We'll darken that up a little bit. Just bring that down. And does that look a little better? That's what I saw with my eyes. That's why I stopped and took this picture. When I looked at my camera and I saw, well, that looks like hell, but then I looked at the histogram and I said, oh, I'm good. I knew I could go home. Because and there's more I would do to this final image. If you guys want me to come back and do a landscape editing program for Lightroom and Photoshop, I'd be happy to. So, monitors. You've seen what the color checker passport can do for your color, how it'll snap it all into place. And you've seen the advantages of having a custom paper profile for your printer. And you do have to have one for each paper for each printer because the ink sets are different. So let me end today. Let's hide all this stuff. I'll end with just a little bit of inspiration.